Hey everybody, Professor Snart checking in again after a little break as we finished up our various student conferences here for our unit, basically between the Unit 5 fiction workshop and then as we move into Units 6, 7, and 8, which are our creative nonfiction units. So we again move towards a workshop. So the posting date, Tuesday, March 8th, feedback date, Tuesday, March 15th. Again, you want to be, as we sort of work through these scaffolding units, beginning to think about and starting to craft your creative nonfiction essay or creative nonfiction piece, before necessarily finishing up, right, Unit 7. So somewhere within our thinking about and working on Unit 6 and 7, you also want to start this workshop piece. So again, you're not trying to turn it around in just a couple of days. Okay, so the next couple of units we have then are sort of introducing us to the idea of creative nonfiction. And in my individual talks with a lot of you, we talked about creative nonfiction and what it is. So this is going to repeat for you guys, but it's an interesting genre that I think fewer people maybe know about or have practiced writing in than, say, have written a short story or certainly read a short story. And in some ways, it's a strange genre because it should be really easy to write in some ways, maybe is really easy to write in. But it can also be really challenging. It sort of exists on both of those extremes. So creative nonfiction is a genre that, and of course, the more you try to define it as this really sort of perfect category, the less or the more blurry those lines become. So it's just kind of a general idea that we're working with here. So creative nonfiction takes all of the tools that we would have learned about and put into practice when we wrote our short story. The creative part, where you have an interest in language, you're using interesting similes, you're crafting interesting characters, you're even thinking about a kind of narrative arc with a clear beginning, middle, and end. So all of that stuff, the stuff that makes the writing interesting to other people to read, is still there. What's different, though, is, of course, the nonfiction piece. So instead of inventing totally new characters, a totally new world for them to be in, you're fundamentally writing about your own experience being in the world, usually focused on a particular kind of isolated incident, even if that incident or experience has broader, implications of some kind. So it's easy in the sense that you're just writing about yourself or an experience that you actually lived through. But of course, the trick then is to make what could be a kind of mundane sort of experience or a very personal one interesting to somebody else. And we make the best case is when we make that interesting, not because the experience is really traumatic, which is sometimes what people gravitate towards when they think creative nonfiction. They think, oh, to make this interesting, I better write this about this really, really important part of my life. And sometimes it feels uncomfortable because it has to be really personal, and all of that other stuff. But really what we want to do is take kind of a more mundane or everyday experience, not one of those really momentous, life-changing experience, and then make it interesting by presenting it in a creative way, right? Using, like I said before, those tools of creative writing that we would have already practiced a little bit in our previous unit, our previous workshop. So again, using languages in an interesting way, providing interesting dialogue, presenting our characters, even if that character is basically you and of course other people that might figure into this event, drawing some philosophical or larger kind of, I don't want to say life lessons exactly, but there's more to the story than just reporting on the facts of what happened. And luckily what we have as we scaffold towards this assignment is the opportunity to read and to hear a couple of authors who actually work in this genre and are fairly well known for it. So again, even if you've never really heard of this before, not something you've actually written before, or even read before, that's part of what we have the opportunity to do as we move through Unit 6, 7, and then of course into our workshop unit. So again, the impulse for a lot of people is to think about the most kind of eventful or traumatic, right, big moment in their life and then use that and hope that just the sort of profundity of the thing is going to make it interesting. But really that's not what we're trying to do here. maybe you take a big moment in your life, but it has to be interesting or presented in a creative or interesting way, even if outside of that big kind of impactfulness of the moment itself. So you have to think again of that reader who doesn't know you, doesn't know your family, didn't live through the same experience with you, has none of that kind of context or background, but you have to make this event or this story that's true, more or less, interesting. Now, the nonfiction part is also a little bit dicey. So fundamentally, it should be a true thing that actually happened. But if you needed to change little tiny details, like you write about let's say the death of a pet is kind of the default example that I like to use, which is, an important moment, not maybe super profound like the death of a parent would be a major, major thing, right? So we're going to take the death of a pet. It's relatable. It has implications for larger life lessons, but it's not so over the top that we're going to forget about having to present this in a creative way. And our goldfish died on Tuesday, which, maybe is actually what happened, but I'm going to just pretend that he died on a Sunday. Fundamentally the same kind of thing, but I'm going to fudge the information a little bit so that it's more, a little more evocative. So Sunday being this kind of religious day, so maybe then my family goes to church, or it just has these other overtones, and we have to bury the goldfish. So I've changed that little thing to sort of bring out the larger point that I'm trying to make, but again, fundamentally it's nonfiction. So don't feel like you're locked into a verbatim retelling of exactly what happened at exactly this time and all that kind of stuff. You change names if you want to or have to. You make little switches, right? But at the core of it, it's basically nonfiction. That again is why the more you try to get really, really definitive about it, the blurrier those lines potentially get. So we're moving then into our Unit 6 here, which kind of introduces us to this idea. And this is a pretty low stakes unit. It's very, very straightforward. Just a basic discussion board that we have here. The video of a reading, right, for these authors that write both fiction and creative nonfiction. So it's sort of like I say here, it's a bridge unit between our fiction and nonfiction, just getting to think about like what the genre is all about. So the video itself is a little bit long, but you can watch it in pieces, 5-10 minutes here and there. And then, of course, respond to the discussion board. So in some ways, it's a bit of a break as we transition to our next genre. Then we move into Unit 7 that I'll just pop into really quickly here. I really like this unit myself. So there's another interview here with a fairly well-known author writing in the creative nonfiction genre. He's sort of a local guy too, sort of a Chicago guy. Another very similar reading and discussion with Susan Messer. Again, another practitioner of the creative nonfiction genre. And then we have an interesting discussion board. So the discussion board is going to point you to a very famous, or relatively famous, series that airs like on NPR every once in a while. It's called the This I Believe series. And it's a really good example of how, a way in which creative nonfiction exists, even if we don't actually label it as such, or it's not published in a book of creative nonfiction. So it's really important to visit the website then and see the guidelines for how this works. Of course, we're not submitting our own story to this. It's not a contest exactly. It's more like a repository of stories. So we're not doing that part of it. We're just doing it within the context of our own discussion board here. There's a good model for what creative nonfiction is. And again, I sort of want you to look for how you can imagine it as a fundamentally true thing that actually happened, but it also has some literary value to it, like we're interested in reading it for more than just the facts of what have happened. So ours is just a discussion board here where, again, you're posting your own work, keeping it relatively short for our purposes here, and responding to 2 other student essays. Almost like a little mini workshop here, but not returning a whole file and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, that turns us around into our workshop. We'll just review our due dates here. So I'm jumping ahead quite a bit, but again, it's good to be thinking about this sooner rather than later. So your posting date, your feedback date, and then if we look at that unit, there are a couple of ebooks that I've got embedded here. And you'll notice that, like some content throughout our course, it doesn't show correctly unless you manipulate the browser security settings, but there's links to those ebooks. And so even if you wanted to actually jump ahead to just the reading part, there's some really good examples. You can pick anything from either of these ebooks and read some really good examples of creative nonfiction. And then, of course, there's our usual workshop stuff. So the cool thing about this is Tom Montgomery Fate, author of the 2 books we've got here, is one of my colleagues here at the COD English department. So it's really kind of fun to have someone who is a nationally known practitioner in this particular genre as the author that we read. Just sort of cool. Makes me want to go get his autograph. But anyway, I'll just fix my browser settings here. See if we can get those to show up. So again, there is a way to get the ebooks to show up, but if you don't want to go through that mess, you can see the browser help link in our course. That'll help you walk you through it. You can just follow the links to the ebooks here. Okay, so again, maybe jumping forward a little bit if you wanted a taste sooner rather than later of what creative nonfiction kind of reads like, you know. And again, we have our Unit 6 and 7 sort of walking us into the genre, and then we're working towards that workshop. As always, if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to be in touch, and I look forward to reading everybody's creative nonfiction.